Reading and design in Photoshop, combining images is fairly straightforward. When you're designing images in Photoshop for print, there are a couple of different considerations that you should be aware of. And I'm going to start off by creating a new file, and I want to demonstrate how to combine three images that you have together and insert a vector graphic, and then define the image itself for a print layout. And let's go to new, and we're going to have a 4x6 area for the postcard. When you're dealing with print, you also have to consider the bleed and the trim marks. The trim mark is going to cut the 4x6 postcard right on the edges to make it 4x6. When you're designing for print, if you have images to the edges, there is a risk of the image being trimmed off, or if the image doesn't quite meet the edge and it's trimmed off, you're going to see a little white sliver around the edges, and that's a bad thing. Considering a 4x6 postcard, you want to add 1/8 of an inch around the quarter, all around the edges. So defining it as 6.25, actually it's 6. That gives 1/8 of an inch around the edges on both sides. So it'd be 6.25, 4.25. We're going to make the horizontal layout. When you're dealing with designing for print, you always may want to make the resolution at least 300 pixels per inch. That way the image is going to look super crisp when you're printing it on a printing press. So we're going to say create. So now we have the 4x6 postcard, but notice that it's bigger to accommodate the bleed and the trim marks that we have going on. So I want to first put guide marks indicating where my actual, so I'm going to set that for 1.25 space here, 1.25 on the other side, and right there. Come on, there. So that gives us the 6 inches in between here. And I'm going to set the guide marks on the top the same exact way. And once we have that defined, and I'm going to go down here. And there. We can take the edge, because notice that the document starts here, the 0 starts here on the edge. We want to actually represent the physical space that we're designing in, and this is the bleed area that we're accommodating for the press. So it's going to be trimmed along these blue lines here. That's where the finished design is going to be trimmed, and your design is within this area here. This is called the bleed area, but I don't want to consider that. So when you're designing it, you can always take this 0 mark in and just re-zero the design. So that way it'll indicate that's the 0 mark here, and it should go over to 6 inches, which is right here. And then it's going to start here for the 0, and it's going to go down to 4. So the rulers will give you a true reading of what you're designing within this space. So when we're placing the images, we want to make sure that the images bounce outside this area into this bleed area, so that way it'll accommodate if it's trimmed like we defined before. You're not going to see any stray white or extraneous background. So let's start by placing the images. I want to place one vertical image here, and that's going to drag it from my desktop. I'm going to place it in here. So here's our image, and I'm going to want to make sure it's out on the edges here. Now, if we look at this image, this is where the bleed area is. But I got this little top of the image here outside this bleed image. I want that to be inside, but if I do that, it just defeats the purpose of having a bleed area, because if it's going to get trimmed here, if this image isn't exactly where that's going to be trimmed, you're going to see a little bit sliver of white space there, and that's not good. So you're really at the beck and call of whoever is trimming the print job after it gets off the printing press. So let's just move on here. I'm going to talk about this in a second, some image considerations. You certainly don't want to stretch your image because that would look off. And that's always a no-no. You always want to keep the image proportions. So when you're scaling the image, you want to hold on the Shift key, and that way you're keeping the proportions of the image and it's not going to look stretched or stretch out or too wide and so forth. So let's pop the other two images in here, and I have one of a dock. Now, whoops, I want to deselect this image. That way we can drag from wherever the image is and it just gets placed on the thing. Placed on our layout. We want to resize this a little bit. Hold down the Shift key and we can resize that accordingly. Make sure that's out into the bleed area. And I'm just going to put the other image in here. And that is the harbor. And resize this. And then once you get a general idea of where the placement is on these images, you can, again, resize and so forth. Now, we have 3 layers that were automatically created according to what the image was called. You can reorder these layers just by dragging. Notice what happens. You know, the top layer here is always going to be the image that's in the front. The bottom layer is always going to be the image that's in the background. So you could actually use layering to your advantage in the way of cropping the image if you wanted. So this, I don't really want to see the sky as much as I want to see the boat. So we can take the move tool here, which is right up here, and we can actually move that better into position. Now, this is where the 2 images are going to meet for the sides, so we can go to the side here. Now, keep in mind, that's the bleed area that's going to be trimmed, so you're not going to see anything that's outside of this guide mark here. So this is just the image that we're going to be able to see right in here. So we'll obviously lose the mast, the top of the mast, and we're not going to see the Ferris wheel at all. So just put that in position there. We're going to take this image right here, and we're going to go right about there. I don't want to see the sky as much as I want to see this area here. Now we can also scale that back a little bit if we wanted to, and that way we can move it up a little bit, get more of the bottom. But that's really up to the designer. You as a designer, you know what part of the image is the important part that you want to see. So let's get back to this image here. Now, this is not going to show. That's an oblique area. That's an oblique area. And what about this top? How are we going to deal with that? Now, we can't resize it to make it look weird because you want to have something up here just to make sure it's not going to get trimmed off. Other options to replace the image with something else. But if you really, really wanted to do this, there's a couple of other options. We can put a border within our document size right here inside this trim area, like a black border, a thin black border. And that way we can resize this image and have it right up to the border here. The way to do that, I'm going to create another, actually get off that layer there. We're going to create another layer. And we can call this border, just double click on it and you can rename it. And then with this layer selected, we can take the marquee tool here and then notice that the crosshairs, usually what I do to have a thin border, I take the edges of the crosshairs right up to our safe area, design safe area, and I'm going to drag. And I'm actually using these kind of like as a measuring tool. Because where it met the edge, that way you know that it's equal. So we have this defined here. Now if I fill this inside, this is going to be filled with black. So what I want to do is I want to go up to select and I want to inverse that selection. So now we have a selection that's exactly opposite of what we dragged that box to. So now I can take the fill tool here, change the color to black, fill inside here. And notice now we have this black border. Now, keep in mind, this is a trim mark here. So we're going to have a thin black border around here. Now we can take that move tool on the path image that we have here, and we can actually drag that down a little bit and meet the top of the image right where that black mark is. So now we get to see this top of the image. We have a black border around here for our trim mark. And let's get back here. There we go. So now the image is going to get trimmed according to our trim marks right there. But we have a black border around here. All right. So now we have these 3 images inside here. I want to grab another image. And that's our Adobe Illustrator logo. And that's quite large, so we just resize that. And we're going to have that down here. Notice you're not going to be able to see it because it's black text. So one thing we can do is, again, we can create. Now that automatically came up here at the top here. So what I want to do is add another layer. And we're going to call this layer logo background. And I'm just going to put BKG. So now we can color this shape. We can create a shape. Make sure that's layer selected. Create a shape. And we're going to go down here, right where the images meet here. And we can fill that with maybe an aqua. And then we're going to take the fill tool, fill that, make sure that the logo, move that on top. And that's how we create the fill shape with the logo here. And then we can take the text tool and we can put in our phone number. And take the text tool here. Make sure that the text color is not the same as the background color. And I forgot 5. So then we can position that phone number. We can obviously we're going to have to resize that text because we don't want it to interfere with the logo. So we can scale that down a little bit. Actually, we should scale the logo down a little bit as well. So you get the point of resizing, moving elements around, creating shapes, inverting the shape to create a thin border. Now notice that the border is not on top of this anymore, so we want to make sure that that border path is on top of, there we go. We want to make sure that that's on top of everything else. So we take that and we can move that up to the top here. There. Now we have the completed design. You see the trim mark. Whoops! You see the trim marks here. If I can get that back into here, we go. You see the trim marks here. Get rid of word. There we go. You can see the trim marks here. Right here, we have a thin black border that's on top of the 3 images that we placed in the background color, the travel logo, the type. So those are some considerations for designing for a print document. You would then take this, you would save this file. Normally, I would save it as a TIFF, a high resolution, but you could certainly save it as a PNG file. You can Once you do that, you can export it and then place it into your InDesign page layout and then add the color bars and marks for the printing press job. So that's how to create a design for print.